We're looking at these raw, totally unfiltered insights from the actual founders who built the modern tech world. We're talking PayPal, Apple, Hotmail, VisiCalc.
The really gritty, chaotic, and often completely accidental process of how you turn, a desperate idea into a multi-billion-dollar company.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to cut through the noise and get straight to the real lessons on startup productivity.
We're looking for the surprising facts, right? The moments they almost went under.
The pivots that seem so obvious now, but, must have been just agonizing at the time, and the sheer resilience it took to drag an idea across that chasm.
And, right away you hit this paradox. The central theme from all these sources is this huge gap between what we think of as business. The PowerPoints, the suits, the scheduled calls.
The 3-inch thick reports.
Exactly. That versus the messy reality of an early stage startup.
Yeah, the sources actually define early startups as the exact opposite of that whole polished corporate image.
But here's the kicker. They also argue that this chaotic, lean world is probably the most productive part of the whole economy.
It's a powerful indictment of corporate bureaucracy, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, if the traditional image of business is all about structure and process, maybe the big lesson here for the wider corporate world is that, more productivity actually comes from being less structured.
From embracing that chaos.
From embracing that early and necessary chaos. These founders didn't survive despite it. It seems like they often harnessed it.
Okay, so let's unpack that chaos. Let's see exactly how these engines of innovation were started, because a lot of the time it was completely unintentional. Let's kick things off with PayPal. Max Levchin, one of the co-founders, is just crystal clear on this. The company was definitively not founded to do payments.
No.
That just sounds bonkers today, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how far off was their original idea?
Oh, they were miles away, just totally in a different universe. Their initial focus was super technical, and it was all based on this one single prediction about the future of computing that turned out to be, fundamentally flawed.
Okay, so what was the prediction?
Levchin was completely focused on security and cryptography. He had this rare skill, and he figured he could package it for big enterprise clients. His whole assumption was that handheld devices, specifically Palm Pilots.
Right, the cutting-edge tech of the day.
The absolute cutting edge, yeah. He assumed that corporations would just adopt them super quickly as their main way of communicating.
So the first business plan was essentially digital security for corporate Palm Pilots.
Digital identity, security management, all of it. A market that, never really showed up in the way they thought it would.
And the actual start of the company, it wasn't some polished pitch meeting in a boardroom.
Not even close. It was far from it. Levchin had just moved to Silicon Valley, and he was, in his own words, squatting on the floor of a friend in Palo Alto. This was the summer of '98. He had no idea what he was going to do.
Wow.
And he ends up going to this random Stanford lecture. It was so poorly attended, there were only 6 people in the room, and one of them was Peter Thiel.
And that's it. That one chance meeting changed everything. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many great ideas just die because the 2 people who need to meet never end up in the same room?
It was pure serendipity. That and Levchin's just palpable passion for the tech. Thiel was running a hedge fund at the time, and he basically told him, take one of your ideas, any idea, start a company, and my fund will invest a few $100,000.
Just like that.
Just like that. And an immediate seed investment based on an informal relationship, and that gave them the runway.
So they have the money, they have the security focus, but the market they bet on just isn't there. How do they find their way to payments? That must have been a brutal process.
Oh, it was a period of really rapid, intense failure. They realized very quickly that big companies were not adopting Palm Pilots fast enough, so they started experimenting.
With what?
Well, ideas like secure digital ID cards on the Palm Pilot, or a way to store passwords securely inside the device. But even Levchin admitted that the password thing felt kind of amateur.
They were flailing.
Completely. The key question they kept asking themselves was, what can we store inside this Palm Pilot that is actually meaningful, valuable enough to get people to use this new tech?
And the answer was money?
Financial value. That was it. They figured that storing financial value was the next meaningful step, and even though that handheld product was eventually killed off entirely once the website took over, that pivot, that single turn toward transactional value, is what put them on the road to payment.
And this is where it gets really interesting for anyone trying to build something new. Levchin credits a huge part of their success to what he called the naivete advantage.
Yeah, which seems totally counterintuitive, right? Especially in high finance.
Totally. What did he mean by that?
It's so vital to understand. He said they were beneficiaries of our naivete. Think about it. If they had been 20-year veterans of the banking industry, they would have known all the rules.
All the reasons it couldn't be done.
Exactly. The regulatory hurdles, the established systems for risk management, the slow, cautious pace of everything. An industry veteran would have been paralyzed by the sheer complexity of it all.
So because they didn't have that long-term experience, they literally didn't know it was supposed to be impossible.
That's it. They weren't constrained by industry orthodoxy. Levchin basically said, we don't know how to do this, so let's just invent it. And that freedom, that willingness to invent solutions for things like fraud detection without the baggage of traditional banking rules, that became their secret weapon.
It's a powerful idea. Sometimes your greatest strength is not knowing enough to be scared.
Right. And speaking of not showing your full hand, let's talk about Hotmail. Sabir Bhatia and his team, they also had a decoy idea when they went to VCs, didn't they?
They did, which really highlights the paranoia of that whole early tech boom.
For sure. The plan they actually used to get the meetings was this solid but frankly unexciting JavaSoft database idea. It was just designed to get them in the door and raise some capital.
But the real idea, the revolutionary one, they kept that hidden.
They kept their killer arrow in our quiver, as they put it, the idea of web-based email. They deliberately held it back from investors because they were terrified that if they revealed this truly transformative concept, someone would just copy it before they could build it.
That's the tightrope walk every founder has
Right.
to do, right? You need the money, but you have to protect the secret that makes the money worth anything.
And that tension really came to a head in the negotiation with the VC. It was a really tough, high-stakes meeting. Bhatia asked for $500,000.
And the VC.
The VC knew they were desperate, but didn't know about the secret idea. So he countered with $300,000 for 30% of the company.
Wow, that's a valuation of just $1 million.
A huge undervaluation if you're sitting on the idea for web-based email. Bhatia described this intense negotiation threatening to walk out and go to other VCs.
So how did they land?
They eventually settled on a better deal, a $2 million post-money valuation for 15%. But, and this is a big but, the VC insisted on a right of first refusal.
Okay, can you just unpack that for us? What does that mean in this context, and why was it so limiting?
It sounds like standard legal stuff, but for a young company, it's a form of control. A right of first refusal, or ROFR, basically meant that for any future funding rounds, Series B, C, whenever they needed more money, that first VC had the right to match any other investor's offer.
So they couldn't shop around for the best terms or bring in a strategic partner later on.
Precisely. It gave that first VC the power to take the entire next round for themselves, blocking anyone else out. It severely limited their flexibility and leverage down the road. Bhatia even admitted he didn't fully get how restrictive it was at the time.
Which just goes to show you have to be as sharp on the legal side as you are on the tech side.
Absolutely. But despite all that, Hotmail's user growth was just, well, unprecedented.
What was the engine behind that explosive growth? Was it a huge marketing spend?
No, not at all. Bhatia really emphasized the sheer power of the product itself on the early internet. If you have a genuinely good product, especially one that frees you from your ISP's email, it spreads by word of mouth and like wildfire.
And they had that viral hook built right in.
They did. They had a small PR firm, but the real driver was the utility and that signature line at the bottom of every single email. Get your free email at Hotmail. It was proof that a great product, combined with the mechanics of the internet, can just scale exponentially.
Okay, let's jump back even further in time to an even earlier disruption. VisiCalc. Dan Bricklin's inspiration for the electronic spreadsheet wasn't just a technical idea, it was about combining different worlds.
That synthesis is everything. Bricklin was at business school, and he brought together three really distinct concepts. First, you have his technical background with programming languages like APL and BASIC.
Okay, what do those bring to the table?
APL was this incredibly terse, powerful language for mathematical operations, like a supercalculator.
That-
BASIC was the accessible, user-friendly part, so he had that calculating mindset.
And the second world.
The second was the world of document layout. He took ideas from word processing and computerized typesetting, so it wasn't just about numbers, it was about presentation.
And the third piece was the practical need he saw every day.
Right. The intense, immediate pain point he saw right there in his business school classroom. He was watching his professor create these financial models on a blackboard or a big paper spreadsheet.
And if one number changed,
The whole thing had to be redone. If you changed one little variable, like a sales forecast, The professor had to physically erase and recalculate every single number that followed. It was hours of manual, error-prone, just agonizing work, and Bricklin realized that process was just begging to be automated.
So his unique insight wasn't just about the math, it was about the layout, the responsiveness.
Exactly. He really pushed back against the narrow view of a spreadsheet as just a grid of equations. His insight was that it's a two-dimensional layout of words and numbers. The labels matter, how the data is organized matters. The instant recalculation, he saw that as word wrap for numbers.
That's a great way to put it. It sounds like he knew he had a killer app, but the sources say he actually struggled to get technical people to see the value at first.
That was a huge hurdle. And it's a perfect example of that unbusinesslike environment. He built a prototype in BASIC on a borrowed Apple II. But when he showed it to the hardcore computer guys, the ones who didn't live with that business pain point, they were kind of dismissive.
What would they say?
Things like, that's cool, I guess, but what's so special? I could just do that in BASIC. They totally missed the interactive power of it.
They were focused on the tool, not the transformation it enabled for the user.
Precisely. They saw a programming trick. They didn't see a market revolution. But the MBAs, the financial analysts, the investment bankers, they got it instantly. They knew exactly how many hours of their lives this thing could save, and their enthusiasm is what drove demand for personal computers. VisiCalc became the killer app for the Apple II.
And you can't talk about innovation under constraint without talking about Steve Wozniak and Apple. His entire design philosophy is about minimalism, which had this direct business advantage.
Wozniak's whole ethos was about building things with the fewest possible parts. He loved using these clever technical tricks to get maximum function out of minimal hardware. And for a bootstrapped company, that was everything.
Because fewer parts means.
Two critical things. Drastically lower cost, obviously, but also simpler, cleaner designs, which meant fewer bugs. He could understand and debug the entire circuit board himself.
And in a world of complex, expensive computers, he was building something you could actually approach and rely on.
And that simplicity led directly to the big innovation of the Apple I. It was, in some ways, more important than the Apple II because it set the standard for every small computer that came after it.
In what way?
It was the first to combine a keyboard and a video display. It made it feel like a typewriter. It was intuitive. The world never went back from that. He created a new default.
The sources also show he could be just staggeringly productive under these insane deadlines, which really speaks to that frantic pace at early Apple.
The story of the floppy disk system for the Apple II is, it's legendary. Wozniak really wanted to go to the first Consumer Electronics Show, CES, in Vegas, that allowed personal computers, but only the sales and marketing guys were supposed to go.
So how did he get on the trip?
Mike Markula, an early backer, gave him what he called a fictitious motivation. He told Woz he could only go to Vegas if he designed the entire floppy disk system, the hardware controller, and the software in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. For something that should take months and a team of engineers, that's just an absurd challenge.
It is. A typical design cycle involves management approvals, documentation, sourcing components, all of it. He just sat down and did it in 2 weeks, all for a trip to Vegas. It just captures that spirit of early startup achievement. Intense focus, sometimes driven by the most random motivations, leading to world-changing tech.
So moving on from the idea to the organization, the sources are just relentless on this point.
What?
The dynamic between the co-founders is often the single most critical factor for survival.
Yeah, and it's something that's so often underestimated. Max Levchin put it perfectly. His advice to young programmers was, try to have a good co-founder. For him and Peter Thiel at PayPal, the value was almost entirely about emotional resilience.
Right.
Levchin realized that trying to run a company alone, especially through a crisis like massive fraud, you're just totally reliant on your own psychological reserves. He said the essential thing that kept them going was knowing that both of us would not be in a funk together.
It's that vital check and balance. If one person is panicking that the company's bleeding out, the other one can be the anchor.
Exactly. When Levchin was getting overwhelmed by the fraud, Thiel would say, no, you're doing fine, we just need to hire more people. And when Thiel was stressed about investors or the board, Levchin was there to back him up. That constant support system was just indispensable.
And you see that same principle, even when one co-founder is, a bit reluctant, like with Paul Graham starting ViaWeb.
Graham picked Robert Morris, even though Morris wasn't totally sold on the idea, because he valued that technical genius above all else. Graham said he'd rather have a quarter of his brain working on some problem than 100% of most other people's.
That's a strong statement.
It is. He knew Morris, his best friend, was one of the best programmers in the world, and that trusted skill was non-negotiable.
And Dan Bricklin had a similar thing with VisiCalc. The friendship was the foundation that let them have these really intense arguments.
Oh, they would yell at each other all the time about technical details. Bricklin said that anyone watching them would have thought the company was about to implode because their arguments were so intense.
So how do you have that level of conflict without it just destroying the relationship?
The foundation was that deep friendship. Bricklin said it was stronger than a lot of the business stuff. And he didn't see the arguing as a negative. He saw it as a necessary process.
A way of testing the idea.
A way of testing understanding and pushing ideas to their absolute limit. He even compared it to how Bill Gates was famously really tough in meetings. The idea is, if you can't defend your position in a heated argument, maybe the idea isn't strong enough.
That really flies in the face of so much modern corporate culture, which is all about consensus and avoiding conflict.
Right, but maybe you need that kind of fire to forge something truly new. And on the flip side, you have Steve Perlman at WebTV, who learned the hard way that if you don't have that deep alignment, it can be fatal.
He said the co-founder relationship is like a marriage.
And when that marriage breaks down, the company just fractures. He and his co-founder had these fundamental differences in their vision for the company. It caused them to lock horns all the time, and eventually they had to separate because their visions were just incompatible. It proves that you need more than just complementary skills. You need philosophical alignment.
So beyond just the founders, these sources give us some great insights into how early leaders actually shaped their company cultures, often by consciously moving away from the norm.
Absolutely. Mitchell Kapoor at Lotus Development seems like he was extremely intentional about creating this unconventional, creative culture. He specifically wanted to avoid a button-down business culture.
And that came from his own background, right?
Yeah, he was very aware of his own unconventional background. He said he wasn't a typical engineering geek. His focus was just on building really cool products, and that informed everything at Lotus. They were surprisingly progressive for that time.
What were some of the specific things they did?
Well, they invested heavily in HR to make sure the culture didn't get diluted as they grew. They did these in-depth annual employee surveys about quality of work-life issues, and they actually listened to the feedback.
And they tied bonuses to it.
Which is the most remarkable part. They tied a portion of a manager's bonus directly to how well they exemplified the corporate values. Things like fostering creativity and work-life balance. They didn't just put values on a poster, they put money behind them. Kapoor even made every single manager get on the customer support lines regularly.
That's pretty radical.
Yeah.
Tying pay to culture, not just metrics. And you see a similar, very personal focus over at Adobe.
Chuck Geschke and John Warnock, their whole thing was just to build a company they would want to work at. And Geschke said that led to extraordinarily low turnover, like 1 or 2% for their top performers, which is just unheard of in tech.
And they built that loyalty with these amazing personal gestures at the start.
Yeah, these early, almost ceremonial gestures. For the first year and a half, they would hand-deliver a dozen roses to a female employee's spouse or a bottle of cognac to a male employee's spouse, plus champagne for the employee. It was this explicit acknowledgement of the sacrifice the families were making.
That builds a deep loyalty right from day one. But of course, not every company manages to keep that cultural integrity as they grow.
Yeah.
Philip Greenspun's story with Ars Digita is a huge cautionary tale.
It really is. Ars Digita failed in part because their growth was just too fast. Greenspun said it was over 25% annually, a rate that management consultants always warn against because it puts too much strain on everything.
And that rapid growth just diluted the core culture.
Completely. When the VCs got involved and started pushing for faster and faster hiring, they brought in programmers who were, in Greenspun's words, agreeable and often very junior.
And the new hires didn't have the same commitment to the original standards.
Not at all. They were happy to be relieved of the original team's really demanding standards, like meticulous code documentation. So the quality suffered, the commitment wasn't there, and that contributed directly to the company's eventual implosion.
It just highlights how important that cultural gatekeeping is, which ties into what Joel Spolsky was doing at Frog Creek, building a company around a specific cultural idea tied to a place.
Spolsky set up his company in New York City specifically to be a fun, high-quality technology company. He saw that in New York, programmers often felt like second-class citizens. The main goal of the companies was finance or advertising, and the tech teams were just support staff.
So he built a place where the engineers were the main event.
Where the engineering mission was the whole point of the company. It was a haven for programmers.
And this whole issue of control over culture, over the process, That was also what drove Mitchell Kapor to found Lotus in the first place. He didn't want to follow the VisiCalc model.
Right. He had a front row seat to VisiCalc's success, but he also saw the structural flaws in their author-publisher model. He realized it was not a very good model economically, and he felt he needed enough control over the process to steer his own ship.
What was the specific economic flaw he saw in the royalty structure?
It was a massive imbalance of risk and reward. The authors, like Bricklin, got these really high royalties, something like 33 to 35% of the gross margin.
Sounds great for the author.
It sounds fantastic, but the publisher had to bear all the huge critical expenses. Customer support, marketing, sales, documentation. So if sales dipped even a little, the author was still protected by their high royalty rate, but the publisher took the full financial hit. Kapor wanted to control the whole stack, just like a successful movie director who also becomes a producer.
So once these companies got through their chaotic origins and built a team, they hit the crucible of scale. And that phase brought threats that were way more dangerous than any competitor.
Definitely. The PayPal fraud avalanche is the perfect example of a self-generated existential threat. Max Legend was warned that fraud would eat you for lunch, and for a while, it absolutely was.
How bad did it get?
Fraud was there from day one, but it became a full-blown crisis in 2000. Levchin called it the year of fraud, and the situation was catastrophic. The company was losing over $10 million per month.
$10 million a month. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars a day.
Every single day, just being siphoned off by organized crime. It was wiping out their revenue and threatening their entire runway. That kind of loss rate would bankrupt almost any company.
So how did they survive when their competitors were folding under the same pressure?
Well, the crisis forced a huge shakeup. The CEO at the time left, and Thiel and Levchin stepped back into executive roles to deal with it directly. But their first methods, manual tracing, printing out huge stacks of transactions for investigators, were just hopelessly outmatched.
So Levchin had to pivot his own expertise from securing Palm Pilots to catching international criminals.
That's exactly what happened. He and an intern basically locked themselves away for a year, working nonstop to build a technical solution. They created this incredibly sophisticated proprietary tool that was part visualization package, part graph balancing tool.
What did that actually do?
It was revolutionary because it didn't just look at one transaction at a time. It was designed to visually map out and predict entire networks of fraud, how the criminals were connected to each other.
So they moved from reacting to individual fraud to proactively neutralizing entire organizations.
That's the key. And that ability to judge systemic risk became PayPal's core expertise. It was their differentiator. Levchin said that competitors who didn't invest in that kind of analysis got buried very quickly. The thing that almost killed them became the foundation of their entire value proposition.
Now, moving from financial crime to just operational chaos, scaling content and users was just as agonizing for the early web companies like Yahoo.
Right. Tim Brady, who was Yahoo's first non-founder employee, said it all started as a pure hobby. Jerry Yang and David Filo were just indexing technical papers for their PhDs at Stanford. But then other grad students found out and started sending them sites to add, and it just ballooned.
It went from a personal project to a full-time, unpaid job of curating the entire web.
For 8 months, they spent 8 hours a day, maybe more, every single day, just manually adding and categorizing websites. The only reason they could even do it was because their thesis advisor was on sabbatical. Then the VCs and the media caught on, and they were basically turned into reluctant entrepreneurs overnight.
And that idea of rapid, almost violent growth is just perfectly captured by Bob Davis's experience at Lycos.
Davis's description of running Lycos while it was growing 200 to 300% a year is just so visceral. He said a rapidly growing company is crumbling within and feels pain every hour of every day because nothing works the way it was designed as little as a year before.
What specifically was crumbling? What did that feel like day to day?
It meant daily internal disaster. The accounting systems couldn't keep up. The data centers were always at capacity. Servers were crashing. Engineers were just putting out fires all day to keep the site online. HR couldn't hire fast enough. The office space was always too small. The pain wasn't just competitors. It was the constant internal implosion that was driven by their own success.
And that kind of reactive high-pressure scaling is just the total opposite of Wozniak's approach of building inefficiency from the very beginning.
Wozniak's Apple II design was just a masterclass in preemptive efficiency. It was all about solving complexity with radical simplicity. Take the system for the peripheral slots. Wozniak designed it using only 2 chips to manage all 8 slots.
And the competing standard.
The Altair computer, which was the standard then, required 5 chips per board. So for 8 boards, you needed 40 chips.
40 chips versus 2. I mean, that's an exponential difference in cost, heat, and potential points of failure.
It was a huge technical and business advantage. But that kind of technical frugality is the complete opposite of the massive systems complexity that Paul Buchheit was staring down when he was building Gmail.
Right. Gmail's scaling challenge was just monumental, and it was all about storage and reliability.
Exactly. When Gmail launched and gave everyone a gigabyte of storage, when the industry standard was a tiny 2 or 4 megabytes, people thought it was a prank. Buchheit's core problem was, how do you manage millions of users, each with a gigabyte of data, and then keep multiple reliable copies and backups of all that data, all while making sure the system is fast, even when machines are constantly failing?
And do it without hiring an army of people to maintain it.
That was the challenge. It required them to invent entirely new infrastructure.
And you see a similar problem with the founder of Dell.eco.us, Joshua Schachter. He found that scaling just pulled him into all this work that he called not useful.
Schachter pointed out that for any consumer internet product, scaling means you have to have flawless execution on all these tasks that don't actually differentiate your product. Like what?
Things like managing bandwidth contracts, network routing, buying hardware, physically racking the servers. Schachter wanted to be innovating on social bookmarking, but he was spending huge amounts of his time dealing with payroll or purchasing hardware.
So the success of your invention literally pulls you away from the act of invention.
It's the great paradox of scaling. Schachter knew that this non-core work had to be done perfectly, but he also saw it as work that was not useful to the product itself. It really shows how that phase turns the founder into an operations manager, often completely against their will.
So once a startup gets to this scaling phase, the second they bring in outside money, the whole game changes. Ray Ozzie from Groove Networks put it perfectly. The best kind of company is one where you don't have to take any money.
He's definitely speaking from experience there. The moment VCs get involved, the pressure just intensifies exponentially. The focus immediately shifts from just building a great product to, hitting metrics, managing the next funding round, and targeting a positive exit event. You're on the VC treadmill. And interestingly, Microsoft actually invested in Groove, not to buy their tech, but because of a mistake they'd made by ignoring a competitor years earlier.
That's such a key historical detail. It really shows Microsoft's strategic paranoia at the time. They invested in Groove purely as a straight investor, just for market tracking. They explicitly did not want to share technology.
Why?
Because they had regretted not tracking Lotus Notes more closely as it was emerging. They felt like they let it get a little bit out of control. So with Groove, they were essentially buying a look at what kinds of customers found this technology attractive so they wouldn't get blindsided a second time.
It was an expensive defensive investment driven by fear. And on the other side of that, you have Katerina Fake from Flickr, who experienced the total irony of the VC funding process. She called it a vicious circle.
She nailed the ultimate irony of raising capital. When Flickr didn't actually need money, they had angel investors, they had plenty of runway, the VCs would not stop calling. But the moment a startup actually needs money because they've hit a wall or a crisis, the interest just vanishes. Nobody returns your calls.
It's a painful cycle where perceived need just kills investor interest.
Exactly. But, not everyone was playing that game. Craigslist took this completely unique, almost philanthropic approach. They actually asked their community for opinions on how they should charge for things.
That's wild.
Craig Newmark was really focused on the morality of charging for something, and the community guided their core principle. Only charge people who would otherwise be paying more money for less effective ads.
So they ended up just charging for things like job ads and apartment listings from brokers.
Right, the high-volume commercial stuff, while keeping almost everything else free. They deliberately walked away from maximizing their revenue just to uphold that community-first philosophy. It's a total anomaly in the tech world.
And aside from money, just getting distribution was often the biggest hurdle. Joe Kraus from Excite said getting distribution was a gut-wrenching moment.
In the mid-90s, distribution meant partnering with the gatekeepers, and the main gatekeeper was the browser itself.
So Netscape Navigator.
That was it. The pivotal deal was getting one of the 2 main search buttons on the browser, the Net Search button. The other one, Net Directory, went to Yahoo. And Kraus revealed that at first, Netscape just gave them that traffic for free.
For free?
Yeah, because Netscape was trying to attract users to its own browser. Getting that one button was the only real point of mass distribution Excite had. It was a desperation move that paid off big time.
The story of Web TV's near-death experience with Sony is a perfect illustration of how fragile these moments were.
Oh, Web TV under Steve Perlman had completely burned through all their cash. They were literally out of money. And they were just about to sign a crucial $4.5 million deal with Brentwood VC to stay alive.
But at the same time, they were negotiating with Sony.
Right, for a major partnership that included a one-year exclusive. And then suddenly they get a certified letter. Sony was pulling out of the deal entirely.
That is just devastating timing. You're about to get a lifeline, and your key strategic partner bails.
Yeah.
And Perlman had to disclose that, right?
He was ethically bound to, and that disclosure should have killed the VC deal instantly. Losing Sony completely changed Web TV's risk profile. So Perlman tells the VC, Jeff Brody, expecting him to just walk away.
But he didn't.
Brody called it a seminal moment. Instead of walking, he said, I believe in you guys. We'll still go forward on the same terms. He committed the money anyway, recognizing Perlman's integrity. And that single vote of confidence immediately attracted Paul Allen, who matched the investment. That one moment of trust from one person turned the tide.
Let's talk about the weirder side of startup economics, like the Ferrari at Ars Digita.
Mm-hmm.
On the surface, it seems like pure excess, but it was actually a calculated move.
It was a complex incentive program disguised as extravagance. Leasing a Ferrari for the programmers looked ridiculous, but it only cost about $1,000 a month. Its real value was as a powerful recruiting tool and a massive PR symbol.
How so?
It got them write-ups in Forbes and other magazines, which, critically, made potential customers think Ars Digita was a super successful, profitable company.
The ultimate unbusinesslike move that gets intensely businesslike results.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony is just perfect.
Oh, it's deep. Greenspun said that when the company eventually failed, the Ferrari was the only asset the VCs actually made a profit on when they sold it. A perfect metaphor.
And then there's the pricing dilemma, where just trying to be a viable business can make you the villain overnight, which is what happened to Six Apart with Movable Type.
Six Apart had this really popular blogging platform, Movable Type, and for years they had free and paid options. The decision that caused this huge user backlash was aimed at stopping big companies from gaming the system.
What were they doing?
These large corporations were buying the cheap $150 commercial license and then using it to support 150 or 200 people internally. They were getting enterprise value for a consumer price.
So Six Apart just wanted to align the price with the value these big companies were getting.
Exactly. They felt it wasn't right that they weren't making a living while others were profiting so much off their work, but the user base just flipped out. Six Apart went from being industry darlings to being evil overnight, just for trying to be a functioning business. It's a classic lesson in the difficulty of monetization when people expect things on the internet to be free.
All these challenges, operational, financial, cultural, they all compound in this immense, chronic personal stress for the founders. And the sources are brutally honest about that emotional toll.
They really are. Max Levchin admitted he could not sleep well for 4 years because of the constant worry about scalability, technology, fraud, publicity. And he was just fundamentally surprised by how big PayPal got. He told Peter Thiel he'd quit if they ever got to 25 people because he liked small companies.
And they blew past that immediately.
The next time they even talked about it, they had 75 people. And soon after, 1,000. That rapid scale just creates this chronic anxiety. That level of prolonged stress just shows the personal cost of building an empire.
And Jim Hong, from High Tea or Not, had an even more immediate, visceral reaction to that early stress.
Hong described the first 8 days after they launched as pure panic and survival. The site just exploded, and the technical problems and unexpected press completely overwhelmed them. He said he got a total of 8 hours of sleep in those 8 days.
How did he even function?
He said he survived by being hallucinogenically optimistic, just always believing that tomorrow things would be better, the crisis would pass, and the company would somehow survive.
And then you have someone like Ann Winblad of Open Systems, who just struggled to explain what she was even doing to people outside the tiny, emerging software industry.
Yeah, she had quit this very prestigious job at the Federal Reserve Bank, which was a decision her parents just could not comprehend. They openly questioned her sanity. It was just so hard to communicate the potential of this software venture to people who weren't in that little world.
So based on all these high-stakes, stressful experiences, the founders distilled some really core and often counterintuitive advice.
They did. Let's start with the one-word answer Michael Dell gave when he was asked for the key to success.
What was it?
He just said, persistence. And that doggedness is the one non-negotiable trait. It's the persistence that makes you fight crumbling systems every day or build a whole new fraud system from scratch instead of giving up.
And Evan Williams, who created Blogger, he really emphasized trusting your own gut, even when everyone else disagrees, which ties back to that naivete advantage.
Williams warned that compromise kills great things. He said if you feel strongly about an idea, if you see something others don't, you have to have the strength to ignore their input sometimes because the idea might be that powerful and different.
If everyone agrees with you right away, you're probably not doing anything new.
Exactly. And Dan Bricklin's defense of constant arguing also challenges that idea of team harmony being the ultimate goal. He saw that intense conflict as a necessary process for testing your own understanding and belief.
We also heard some great advice about minimizing the cost of trying new things from Tom Coffer at TripAdvisor.
Coffer encouraged this culture of making frequent small mistakes. He believed that overanalyzing just kills momentum. He said, before you take any risk, the only question you need to answer is, what's my downside scenario in terms of time and opportunity cost?
And if the cost of being wrong is small,
like a few weeks of work, then you should just do it. Make a lot of mistakes and just rip out the bad features later. The speed of learning is more important than the certainty of success.
that connects perfectly with what David Heinemeier Hansson said about the power of constraints when he was building Basecamp.
Hansson has this fundamental belief that having too little money is a great way of getting great product, because those constraints force you to be focused, to be minimalist, and to prioritize ruthlessly. He claimed that if they'd had unlimited time and money, they could never have reproduced the elegant, intentionally limited design of Basecamp.
So this whole deep dive has really laid bare this profound dichotomy in the early startup world. On one hand, you have this engine of almost insane productivity. It's driven by technical elegance, by these accidental pivots. But on the other hand, it is a world that is just defined by immense personal and financial stress.
Right, you're losing millions a month to fraud, you're getting 8 hours of sleep in 8 days, you're constantly one bad funding round away from complete collapse.
And what's maybe most telling when you think about why companies ultimately fail is the conclusion from the source material. Anne Winblad noted that most companies don't fail because a competitor crushed them or the tech was impossible.
The vast majority of companies fail from self-inflicted wounds by the leadership team.
That is just a critical, hard-hitting dose of reality.
Yeah.
The biggest risk isn't external.
It's internal. It's the inability to maintain focus, the refusal to adapt your management style, the failure to manage your own stress, or co-founders who just can't stay aligned. Those human dynamics are so much more critical than the market competition.
The ability to actually run the company well, to manage people, to resist the pressure to grow too fast. That's the ultimate risk. You see so many of these technical founders like Wozniak, Kapoor, Geschke. They were driven by the pure desire to build a great product.
Building a large company was often this necessary but kind of unpleasant evil that was forced on them by their own success.
So, as we leave you with all this hard-won knowledge for the people who define the industry, the final provocative thought is this. For you, as a founder, what is the ultimate goal? Is it the painful, multi-year commitment to building an empire, navigating fraud and dilution and endless stress all for a huge exit?
Or is it achieving financial freedom? The ability to quit that treadmill and just build what you want on your own terms. Jim Hong from AT or Not made a really clear distinction. He said the first million is often all you really need for freedom and control over your life.
The rest, he suggests, is just scaling someone else's dream.
And that decision, whether you're seeking freedom or empire, that determines whether you can harness the chaos or whether the chaos ultimately consumes you.